I brushed on, and as you can see, if I touch my canvas with my finger, you can see that there's an imprint of paint. Now remember, once again, this is the foundation I'm working on. There will be a few shows in the future that I will not have the base coat applied. There are times when you want it to work for you and times when you don't. This happens to be one of the times when I'm working with a vignette that I want soft edges. So we'll use our large brush and go to the palette, and on the palette, if you look, I've pre-mixed a couple of my colors. And this was to save time, and once again, I want to recommend that you don't try to paint along with me because you're liable to miss some of the techniques. So just watch and take notes. I took a little alizarin crimson and Prussian blue and just mixed them together to get kind of a lavender value. So I'm working in this lavender or purple, and I've got a very dark mix of it. And that's all I used were the two colors, my alizarin and my Prussian. And I'm going to use the end of the brush and just pick up a little bit of this color and work it into the brush and get it very soft and very light. We'll start out very gradually, and then we'll build and strengthen in our color. So as I work it into the brush, be careful not to get excess in a corner. Then we'll go to the canvas, and we're going to loosely block in, and I'm rolling the brush. I'm kind of loosely rocking it on the corner and getting a loose edge there, thinking about my vignette, and floating some of the soft edges to suggest a background. So as I said, we'll start light and we'll build darker and darker. I like the variations of colors that I get by mixing with the base coat. The canvas is wet. This is oil paint, if you're just tuning in, and it's going to make it work more easily to soften some edges. So I'm going to take a little more color, once again, on the brush to the palette with my mixture of my Prussian and alizarin, work it in, getting it a little deeper or a little darker, evenly distributing it in the bristles. You can notice I go back and forth. I spend almost as much time on the palette as I do on the canvas to load the brushes properly. Now we'll go back to the canvas, and in the heart of the bouquet, this is one area right in here that you want a little more strength of color. So I'm going to go right in, about center canvas, bring a little color off to the right. The reason I'm putting in these color interest positions is I know that I'm going to be putting a little cascade of light flowers here, and I'm going to get a little bit of floating color up here. And I'm just trying to lay in some foundation contrast areas that I will use and build on. Let's go a little bit over to the left edge and soften that in. The pressure I put on the brush will determine how much comes off. Sometimes I just easily brush in and let it soften out into the vignette, and other times I'll push hard and I'll get a lot more color intensity by using more pigment off the brush. Notice I'm not trying to make a perfect circle. I want the interest in the variations around the edges. Okay, and I'm just going to gently, very little pressure, kind of blend it. We call this our blender brush because it softens and it just gently moves the paint and softens it. So these little interest movements will create a little variety in your background, and we'll use a little more paint. We're going to get a little darker right in the mid-canvas. So let's get a little more color on the brush. And the reason I want a little darker, once again, is to make those flowers sit down when we pull out the pot or the vase. A little more color, and back to the canvas, right in this area. I'm making a little stronger and a little down on the right edge. So by building in our color intensity, we begin to give a little more variety to our background instead of just having it brushed in solid. Okay, that's about all I need at this point. I want to be sure at the bottom of the pot I put a little bit of color. Now, notice the pot's not there. We will pull the pot out with a different technique. I'm going to be trying a few new things as we work in the composition to show you can approach things sometimes with a reversal. Well, I'll put the large brush aside. I'm not going to bother to clean it because I probably won't go back to it. I'm going to go to a little flat bristle brush, which is a very springy bristle, and it's not stiff. It won't cut through the paint. And I'll use this into that same mix, maybe a little more of that color. Now, the color I'm using is my mix of alizarin and Prussian, and it's also going to be used for my flower, for my dark, deep purple flowers. Now, I'm not getting into the finger flowers yet. Let's paint the pot with this color mix. I'm getting it deeper, richer, and I like my background color to complement the floral arrangement that I use. If I were to have coral-type colors, I would have that color in my background. I'm going to just pull out the left edge, and I'm going to make kind of like the letter C, and just push in, and I'm not really painting the pot, I'm painting the background. So I push that in and find the edge of the pot, and then I just pull that color out into the background. Now I don't want to see the top edge, so I even destroy the top edge a little bit and just place that little bit of color. And then I'm going to let the bottom have a little color. So by doing this, I let it fade, and I get a lot of lost edges in my composition. So I'm a little left of center. Once again, I need just a little more paint. I'm going to wipe the brush, go to the palette, and get just a little more of the deep color, and pull that in a little stronger. Notice how much richer that color mixture is. It flows on easily because of the base coat. Okay, find the edge, wipe the brush, and then blend that out. Sometimes I just kind of scrub it in to eliminate that hard line on the left side, and that pulls the pot out. Now, once again, I'm not looking to paint the entire pot. This is just an impressionistic type arrangement. Scrub that in loosely. Now, if I have hard edges with the brush, I'll use my finger sometimes and just kind of smudge and soften some of the action that the brush makes. Sometimes I'll just kind of gently soften the top edge of the pot, letting that color be in there at the bottom. And I just rub in the direction that I want the pot to be indicated. And wipe your finger occasionally and find that pot. Once again, this finger smudging a lot of times gives you a softer blending than a brush will give you. Now, if I want to use a bristle brush or a fan brush, I can wipe my finger off and go to, I'm going to use my 1-inch brush, which is a smaller version of my large brush. It's just clean, and I'm going to go in, I'm going to lightly soften any harsh edges. That pulls out the pot. I don't want to see the bottom, so I'll just kind of smudge that in a little bit. There's a lot of lost lines on this. Okay, there, we've got an indication of where it's located. Now, I'm not going to paint the detail in the pot. Before I get started, I'm going to use the same brush and go back to that coloring and add just a few drops of my odorless center to my oil paint, making it a little looser. This will allow it to flow on the canvas just very easily because I've thinned it slightly. Not runny, but loose. Then I'm going to go up and I'm going to find the contour to my composition. I want a little S-curve. I want to find and get the feeling for the arrangement that I'm working with, and it happens to have a little S-curve. If you look at the original painting that I'm going to, the finished painting picture, you'll see that it has a flow from up at the top and down around on the right side of the pot. So I'm going to locate that with just a little edge of the brush, very little pressure, make that curve and that contour and let it hang just on the right edge where the right side of the pot would be. So a little more paint. I'll come back and I'll begin to get a few filler branches in, and this is what I use as my guide. Sometimes I have a smaller one hanging to the right, another one off to the, the left, and then another one off to the right, and I begin to indicate the actual flow of my composition. Oops, we don't want that too heavy. That's where your finger comes in handy. This particular painting is a lot of fun. The color variations are, you can use anything, but I'm just trying to show you an easy way or a nice way to loosen up. This is a good painting to take your time and just play into, and I think you'll find it fun. My students always have a good time with this particular composition. So I now have the S-curve kind of indicated, and I only use that for a guide. I'm not looking to stress any detail yet. While I have this color on the brush, let me use a paper towel, and I'll wipe out some excess. I'm not cleaning it, I'm just taking extra paint out, and while I've got this, I want to begin to indicate a few little shadow or distant background movements. So I'll just wipe most of the paint out, and then I'll put a little smudge here, and I'm just dabbing. I'm taking the brush, you'll come in real close, I'm taking the brush and smudging it a little bit, and making some little light leaves, and as your leaves go up a stem, of course they get smaller, and then you can have a few down in here. Now these may not look too much like leaves at this stage, but I'm not looking for detail. I'm getting a backdrop or setting the mood for my composition, and I'm just dabbing at the canvas. When we want the leaves to really look like leaves, we'll be using more color. Just kind of follow down the flow of your composition. A little more paint, a little more of the background color. Now I am getting just a little stronger with my coloring, working it into the brush. Always start in the middle of your composition. So if it's too strong, by the time you work in that area, this is where the bulk of your arrangement is concentrated, so you can want to have a little extra strength of color in there, and then work up and out some of your lighter little stems to fill in. Your leaves should have a variety of sizes. You want little little leaves and middle-sized leaves and sometimes turned leaves. So all I'm doing, once again, is setting up the mood or the flow. You can already see that it's beginning to imply that there's some little leaves there or flowers there. So as we work on this, you want to go ahead and just don't concern yourself with detail. Just try to get a little bit of the mood of what's beginning to happen. Now that I have where the arrangement's going to be, it's at this stage that you might want to change your mind. You might decide you want a little more weight on the flower arrangement here. Floral arranging, well, like I mentioned on one of my previous shows, I'm not good at floral arranging, but I do know that the contour and there's a gracefulness and a flow, so we want to keep that in mind while we're going. And if you've done flower arranging, you'll probably be able to do a prettier composition or prettier arrangement and placement. I'm going to wipe the brush and clean it at my odorless thinner. Make sure it's dry. Don't leave your thinner in your brush. You don't want your paints to get too thin. I'm going to go in and paint the pot right now and pull out that detail before I start introducing any more leaves. And with the clean brush, I'm going to go to some titanium white and pat it on my palette. Let's come over here. Take some titanium white. I'm going to use just a little bit of the lighter color of my mix. And I'm using just the alizarin, and I'm making a pink. Now, I know I've called this my finger flowers. It's only the large flowers that we're going to be doing later that we'll use our fingers. Right now, we're going to paint the pot and some leaves, and we will use the brush. With this pink color on my brush, I'm going to paint a little donut, a little round circle. We're not going to use the end of the brush and brush it on. I want to see you, if you're trying this technique, use the side of the brush, and we're going to pat with the side of the brush a little circle. Or I tell my students, paint a little donut. Little pink donut, doesn't have to be perfectly shaped, and get that coloring on there very loosely. Wipe the brush. Let's get a little of that white out. Didn't clean my brush well. And just let it soften and go wider and wider. I'm just patting in a circle, leaving a slight little amount of texture, very gently letting it ease into that pot. That's going to build up the edge. Now as I clean my brush, let's go a little more pink so you can really see the impact that this will give. A little pinker. And go right around that and get wider and wider and wider. And this allows just a little bit of texture. If you bump in little edges, don't worry, just ease it in and reshape your pot. If you make a little smudge, just use your finger and reshape. Now I'm going to clean the brush, and inside that little donut circle, we're going to wipe, use some titanium white all by itself on the side of the brush once again, and pat it right in the center. And after I get the white on, I wipe the brush, and I start patting wider and wider and wider as it gets into the pink. That gives me a soft feeling or a little bit of a rise to the canvas. Up and where it disappears into the shadows, or if you want to, you can bring a little shadow down and make a few little shadow leaves hanging down. Once again, no detail. Now I use the pink and white on the back. I'm going to use a little blue and white. I'm going to clean my brush and go to a little titanium white and just clean Prussian blue. And I'm going to pull out the reflective light or the shadow edge of the pot in the distance or back on the corner. I'm going to sharpen this edge here. By now I will paint the edge of the pot, and if I wipe off half the brush, now if you can come in real close, you can see I'm taking a paper towel, I'll have to get a clean one in a minute, and wipe off half the paint, and then put the brush with the paint side on the outside and touch and just slide right down around the edge, and that brings out the shadow edge of the pot, and let it fade. Just wipe the brush and soften it in. Let it disappear into the shadows, and once again disappear into the bottom or into the shadow at the bottom. If you get too much distinction, you can just smudge it with your finger. This is a good time too to reshape your pot. Now I'm not going to spend a lot of time with the perfect contour. I just want you to get the feeling of there's a rise in the pot, it disappears back in the shadow, and we have a contrast area there. With the same flat bristle brush, I'm going to go into the palette, and I'm going to start introducing a little bit of green, but I don't want to go to clean sap green. If you go right to the clean sap green, it'll be too intense, and it'll overpower your flower color. So I'll use the flat bristle brush, get a little bit of green, and go right into the color mix of my background. And it'll soften it, or it'll drab it down and make it less intense. So I work the paint into the brush. Once again, I'm not putting excessive paint into the brush. I'm putting the pigment in, and then I'm brushing it quite hard on the palette, so it's really very dry. You'll find it kind of resisting. Oily paints to this will begin to slide a little too much. Now I'm going to go and check the paint, and I'm going to do a few little pats of the brush and put a little point on there. I touch the brush, wiggle it, lift up, and I make some little pats in of leaves, and I just get smaller as we go up. And then we're beginning to get a few little introductions of green leaves. Once again, I'm not loading and reloading my brush a lot because I want the colors to fade and soften. Sometimes I have a little stem that goes out here and out there. And as I'm just dabbing, I'm not really indicating detail leaves at this stage. I'm just kind of patting with the slide of the brush and letting it have soft effects of leaves. So we've got a little block in there. Let's now go and let's try a few of our finger flowers. If you want to use your thumb, it works fine, but I find I'm having a lot more trouble cleaning my thumb than I do my finger, so I'll use my finger. And with my finger, I'm just going to pat right into that dark flower color. Now, I know this is messy, and you do have the option of using a brush, but I find this fun, and my students really find this will loosen them up and relax them. Besides, it's very hard to overload a finger. You can overload a brush, but a finger's a little tough to overload. So we'll just pat into this with the finger, and then we're going to go right to the canvas, and we're going to locate our main flowers. There's going to be one large flower. As you follow the contour of the pot, it's going to be kind of inside. You don't want to get hanging over here because it'll get too side heavy. So follow that line up and go just a little in and pat. And with the finger, just pat right in the center and just dab that coloring on until you get a little loose edge flower. And believe it or not, that's my flower. I'm going to wipe my finger, reload it. It sounds a little funny to wipe your finger and reload it. But I'm going to go make a smaller flower. We want this to be a little lower and off to the right and not as large as the previous flower. If you start getting too many on there, they get heavy. So I'm going to make another flower and make it a little smaller. Now, if my color's a little weak right now, it's okay. I can always go back and pat a little more. But we're not really looking for the strong intensity just yet. So I've got a large, a medium, a little more paint, and I'm going to go right up above it and follow my contour, my S-curve that I established, and make another one, smaller one here. Now I'm running out of paint on the finger. I'm going to go a little higher and make it smaller, and then smaller, and then I'm just going to pat, pat, pat as I'm running out of paint and get a few little buds and things as it cascades down. Now, if you reload and you go here, you'll have too much weight and too much strength. So allow that to just kind of dab on there. Here's a little flower. You can see I've run out of paint, but these are backgrounds. These are soft ones. And I just dab my finger. There's not much paint there, but that's all I need. If the large flowers need a little more color, I want these to have strong impact, I'll take a little more paint and I'll dab right in the heart of them one more time, and I'll get my 3 flowers that are the most important with a little stronger paint. And those are what I call finger flowers. Okay, maybe one more dab there. Now we can clean our finger and see if we can get it out. My nails always stay blue with this, so you're wondering why I always have blue nails. It's because I enjoy relaxing and playing with the students and getting some of these compositions in. For the centers of the flowers, I'm not going to use the paint. I didn't put it out, well, I do have a little bit out, but if you don't need a lot in a composition, sometimes I take the tube of paint and I just touch into the paint and I just pat on the end of it, and we're going to double load a finger. We're going to pat the yellow on and just get a little bit of a buildup. Let me see if you can see that. Right on the end, I've got a little edge and I've got a little pat of yellow paint. And when I'm through with the yellow, I'll take the yellow ochre and I'm going to do the same thing and pat right in the heart of that and get some ochre in the middle of my finger. So if you can look up real close, you'll see that I've got ochre with the bordering outline of my lighter color. Well, with this, I don't want too much on there, I'm going to come right into the center of the flower and I'm just going to touch one time and make little centers in my flowers. Now, you don't need to put them in all the smaller ones, but that's really all I'm going to do. That can be done with the brush, but I think you'll have more fun with your finger. Okay, that's just an indication of some of the finger flowers. We're going to go back to our brush, and that's our little flat bristle brush. Call it a floral brush. This happens to be a size number 16. And I'm going to indicate a few more leaves. While we're working on the leaves, we want to start bringing in a little more impact and a little more detail. So we'll take the brush. I haven't cleaned it, but I am wiping it. I'm going to go in and I'm going to bring a little more green in. Now, sap green happens to be quite strong. I allow a little bit of the alizarin into the green to drab it down. I am using a little more paint, and I'm going to just go up to the canvas right now, and I'm going to make a few darker leaves around these flowers. Just rub it in, make a little big one. Little big one, make a big little one. How's that? Here's another one, and we're just going to put a few more leaves indicated on the bouquet. Maybe one hanging down over the edge of the pot. You just rub it in just gently, lift up and make a little point on the end and let it point in the direction you want it to hang. Okay, that's beginning to fill in. Remember, you can take your time, add more color, add more interest as you go. Okay, let me stand back and check. I think my pot's a little crooked. Watch how I straighten it up. I'm going to use my finger, and I'm going to bring the bottom of the pot up just slightly, just by moving the paint and smudging the paint. But I also let it go into the bottom of the pot because that's a lost edge. That edge there is not necessary to have any strong impact. I just want it kind of subtle. Okay, the finger flowers are done. Now we're going to be putting in a few accent flowers. These flowers kind of make the painting, and I'll show you a few little tricks with the liner brush with your accent flowers. I have a clean liner brush, and the first thing I'm going to do is go into some thick white. The reason I'm not going into my base coat white is because it happens to come off too easily and will make a very strong impression. Just like we had those subtle leaves in the beginning where we just kind of indicated a few, we want to have a few subtle little flowers just to kind of fill in, and then we'll go in with some detail. So by using the thicker paint, or the thicker white, I'm going to go to my palette, to my titanium, which will make it not come off. Normally when I use this brush, I use it very thin. But I'm using the thick, so when I dab onto the canvas, I'll get little, they're actually smudges. They're not detailed. So with the thicker paint, I'll come up to the palette, and I'll just have maybe a little dab here or there. And I'm touching the brush and kind of bending it slightly. If you can come in real close, I touch and put a little bit of bend in all different sizes and let them kind of fill in over in here. And sometimes as I run out of paint, when I really touch and bend far, it begins to look like it's beginning to open. It's a little bud opening. And I bend away from my pot. Don't bend towards it because you want the feeling that they're growing out there. And I know I don't have much coming off the brush. If I turn it over, I can get a little more. And I've just got these little light filler flowers. Now these aren't detailed, but I will go in and do a few details. But before I get into the details, I'm going to use the liner, and I'm going to dip it into my thinner and go back to my palette, and I'm going to use a little bit of the green that I was using before and making it very weak with thinner. In other words, it's very watery in consistency and very loose, and I'm rolling the brush, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to put a few connecting twigs. I'm going to use the liner, and I'm going to make a little interest twig and have some little floating twigs that I'm going to add a few more little flowers on and help balance your composition. It's just like floral arranging. You may need another flower here or another flower there, and the nice part of this technique is you can always go back in and add them. Taking them out's a little tougher, so I like to build my composition up all together, and I find it works quite well for me. Let's bring a little stem hanging down over here, a little twig off the side, and have a few of those. Okay. The little detail flowers, I'm going to take my base coat up and hold it so I can really dip and get enough of this. I'm using the base coat right by itself and dipping in the brush. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to make little lines. I'm making about 4 lines that are coming down to a dot. I try to avoid making little starfish, so I just come down and I look for a contrast area. I look for an area that is very dark so my little light flowers will stand out. And I just bring a few little lines all together. There's a little flower. Here's a little flower. Here's a little flower. And we're going to make some little... Okay, we're making little flowers. And I'm going to make another small one here. And we're just about tying up with the flowers. Be careful where you put them. You can get too many of these. If I decide my composition is a little too overdone, I can go back in and put some others. The finishing touch on the little flowers to make them flowers is a little bit of your thinner into your yellow ochre. I have that on my palette, and I'm thinning it down, and I just want a little dot or a little center into it. And I put into my bigger flowers, I put a little center in and finish that. Okay, with this, I'm going to stand back and check my composition. Sometimes my sharp edge here, if I need to go back to my flat bristle brush, if you look right here, that's sometimes a little lost, or if I have a hard line, I'll go in and I'll soften it just slightly with my finger. Or I'll come back in and I'll pull it out with another stroke of that double-loaded brush with the little white edge on it. I can even pull that out in white. I could have a few more little flowers down in here, little tiny buds. I'm going to use the liner, and I'm going to finish this one so I can talk to you just for a minute. And I'm going to use the color in my painting that we have, using it thin. And I'm going to just sign my signature right here. And once again, I use my liner to sign my signature. And I like my signature as a part of my painting. A lot of times you'll find that your signature will stand out a little too strongly, or if you're working on a vignette, some artists like to sign it down on the bottom, but a lot of times that's the first thing that will capture your eye. So it's nice to make it a part of your composition. It's nice to make it flow into it, and a lot of times the looseness. Now this particular painting is very loose, a lot of fun, and if I get blue on my fingers, a lot of times if I rub my nose, I'll end up with a blue nose. But it's something you can do with a lot of variety of colors. You can add a lot of accents. Sometimes I put little buttercups in here. But the freedom that you get of doing this type of composition, not only can you match it in any decor, but you can have a lot of fun with it. I really hope you've enjoyed this one and gotten some new ideas to play with. Thank you.
For your step-by-step instructional guide to Paint with Pittard, call 1-800-453-4800. That number again, 1-800-453-4800. Please have your American Express, Visa, or MasterCard available. Or send $14.95 to Paint with Pittard, P.O. Drawer 3248, Palm Beach, Florida 33480. Instructional videotapes are also available.
On Saturday, January 21st, Lynne Pittard will be giving a special painting demonstration at the Acton Junior High. Tickets are $10 each, and proceeds benefit Channel 2. If you'd like more information about Mrs. Pittard's visit, call 508-897-8441. That's 508-897-8441.
Paint with Pittard has been made possible by a grant from Graphics Plus of Florida, Incorporated. West Palm Beach, Florida.
Local broadcast of Painting with Pittard is made possible by our members in partnership with the Prescott House Nursing Home, located in North Andover, Massachusetts, and owned and operated by the Solomon family. And with the Magic Touch Art Studio in Maynard, Massachusetts, owned and operated by Chuck O'Neill.
Hi, I'm Julia Childs. Think of what Channel 2 television does for you. Won't you help support it? Send as much as you can, either telephone 492-1111 or send your check to Boston 02134. Please act now.
This is member-supported Channel 2, the best television on television. Of Julia Child and Company is made possible by our members in partnership with the Victor Company Realtors, serving the residential real estate market in the Merrimack Valley, with offices in Andover, Boxford, Haverhill, Methuen, and Topsfield. With the Johnny Kane Company, makers of all-natural Kane's mayonnaise. And with Welch's, makers of fine products from fruit since 1869, like Welch's Squeezables, jellies, jams, and preserves. From Welch's, America's Fruit Basket.
Funding for this program is provided by this station and by